because we're supposed to be already live maybe like 2 minutes ago, but no worries. Technical things are happening, and it's a part of the life, and yeah, we need to take it as we take rain, you know, or any other natural, not disasters, but natural kind of phenomena. So
that's right. Or man-made phenomena, I think.
precisely.
Yes.
Yes. So awesome. You are here, and our topic today is, well, we are exploring, you know, fear and uncertainty, and we are diving into our life, I don't know, experiences and stories and events, and trying to reflect on them, analyze them. And so far, it was quite successful. I mean, I really enjoyed our conversations because, yeah, I realized already some, you know, some some insights and some interesting, you know, layers which I never thought before. So looking forward for our today's conversation, because today is the fear, uncertainty, and I know the title, Lost in the Desert. So tell me more about that.
I thought that might pique your curiosity. You know, it was interesting
Yes, it did.
as I reflected from the conversations, as you said, that we've had before. At what struck me last week after we finished our talk was an experience that I had, and thought about how fascinating it was with all that had happened. And I'll share with you that in the late 90s, this is 20 some years ago, I was fortunate enough to work in Egypt, and it was part of the work that I was doing, and I had made some friends in the office there in Cairo. And the short story of this is that a young gentleman who I became friends with, who was a little younger than me, said, let's go for the weekend and take a trip far out into the desert to an oasis that is called Siwa. It's Siwa. And the route to get there is quite long. You have to take buses and transfer buses. You go along the Mediterranean, and then you take a bus out into the desert south to the oasis called Siwa. And Siwa essentially was a place where there was a lot of Bedouin. It was a Bedouin society, but also a place where Alexander the Great used to go to consult an oracle. And so that's one of the kind of famed parts of it. And they still have remnants of where that had taken place. So I thought, this is fascinating, right? And so here I was, you know, I'm not the biggest adventurer, but I thought this was great, wonderful. So off I go with my friend, and he invites his friend as well, a friend that he's had all of his life. And so we get to Siwa. We get there, you know, after hours and hours of this trip. And we find a place to stay. He had some friends there, and we couldn't find a hotel room because this is early in the days before there were a lot of hotels. A lot of backpackers would come there. So we ended up spending the evening on literally cots that were made out of rope. And I thought, okay, wow, I'm really, really doing the adventure. And so he had organized the next morning for us to take what they call a safari. And the safari is to go out into the desert and go over the dunes. And then at some place in the desert, you would kind of camp out and cook and create a fire and just kind of socialize and connect. And this is wonderful. So the next morning we get up very early. We go out and get in the Jeep. And this is an old Jeep that's all metal. And there's about 3 other people with us, including, you know, plus the driver and a passenger that was going to help. And on the top of the Jeep, they put all of the kindling that they would use for the fire in the desert. And my friend decided that it might be a great idea to get up on the top of the Jeep and videotape the whole experience from this perspective. Little did I know that when this adventure began, that it would kind of end where it did. And so I'll try to be as brief as I can, but as we went out into the desert, I mean, this is out in the desert. This is part of the Saharan, and it's next to the Libyan border. And we're driving along. I'm in the back. We're in this, I felt like almost a tank. And we're driving, and he's increasing the speed, and we're going over the dunes. And, I kept thinking, wow, my friend's up there, but he's, we kept yelling, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yes." And then at some point, all I remember is that we go up this very steep dune, really steep, and he's revving the engines. And then all I saw was blue sky, and that was it. And what ended up happening is that we went over the dune and we came down, literally straight down into the sand. And I can't tell you how high it was, but it was so high. And the truck went right into the sand. And the gentleman that was next to me had cut his head. Everyone was moaning and groaning. It's the fact that no one was killed was amazing. But what no one remembered in that moment was that our friend was still at the top.
Wow.
And, yes. And without getting too graphic, the good news is that he fell off. But what happened was that in his falling, actually one of the branches went through his hand. But he was, and then he started screaming in pain, and we all kind of got organized. Everyone was generally okay. And he, he was able to kind of, calm down and all of that. And so here we were out miles and miles in the desert. And I kept thinking, wow, this is going to be like, this wasn't what I expected, right? Again, there's this whole thing. What is that expectation, right? So now that expectation was completely gone in terms of, what I thought was going to happen. We ended up, so the guys who were driving stayed with the car and with the truck. And the people who were with us decided to go in one direction because they thought they would walk back somehow to town, which was miles and miles away. There was nothing you could see except desert and dunes. And my friend and I and his friend decided that we were going to go another direction. And while we were doing this, it's getting close to the point of, the sun coming out. And, here we were totally exposed in the desert. Fortunately, I had water with me. But I do remember that there was a point where we were literally clawing our way up the dunes, out in the hot summer Egyptian desert.
Wow.
And yes, and as I reflected back, I remember that for some reason I didn't have any fear. The fear that I did have was if something happened to me, like, wow, I remember saying, well, this is an interesting way to die. If I were out in the desert, my parents would be quite upset, but John perished in the Egyptian desert. I mean, you can't make it up.
Yeah.
But what was fascinating is that the friend of the friend, he was a bigger guy, and he broke down the entire time, just breaking down, crying, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to die. And I remember just saying to him, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going, keep moving on. And so fast forward, we are walking hours in the desert. We're dripping with sweat. We had to put our shirts over our heads because it was so hot. And we go over top of some plateau, and we look down, and there's tents, and there's cars, and there's people. And so we go down, and we find out that there's a water hole, which is very natural in this place, where there's rivers that run underneath the desert, and there's a water hole. And so there were people there who were having a picnic. They had that was their safari, but it was much more elaborate. It was something that would be done by people who had money. And so we explained what happened, and they were starting to get prepared to finish their picnic because soon it was going to get dark, probably within an hour or two. And we asked if we could ride back. And the people who actually had done the safari were American. And the woman came up to me and she said, "I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to go with us. And we can't send anybody back for you because it will be too dark in the desert and they won't be able to find you. So you're all going to need to stay here. I'm sorry." And I kept pleading with her, like, we'll squeeze in, we'll do whatever. No, no. And then I thought, wow, here we go. Now I'm going to have to spend the night in the desert. So with all that, what happened is that the men who were there, the Egyptian men who were there, fed us, and they gave us water, they gave us the food to eat, and we ended up going into the pool figuring, we're going to be there in the evening, and it was going to be scary because it gets cold in the desert, and we weren't really prepared to be there. They would give us some wood for the fire. And so as they packed up, I just remember thinking, wow, we've got through this moment of getting through the dunes. Now I have to get through this night. And that's when the fear kind of set in. Because I figured we survived this, but I started really dealing with this uncertainty of what was going to happen. But the other thing that happened was that I was angry. I was angry at this woman. And I was really in that moment, in that space. But somehow, and as I reflected, I let it go. I let it go. And I realized that I had to enjoy this moment and do whatever it was going to take, to just be in this space. And I had the two people with me that will be okay. I wasn't sure, but we'd be okay. But I was angry. And somehow I had to let that go. And ironically, as they were getting ready to pull away, it was like you can't make this stuff up. The guys in our Jeep pulled up in front of this encampment. How they were able to manage getting the Jeep out of the sand and restarting it, I thought the axle was going to be broken. My friend was still in a lot of pain, and they, so we all got in the Jeep, and we made our way, and it was starting to get dark, and we made our way, and they stopped in the desert, and they said, "You have to see this, you have to experience this." And we got out of the car, and here we were in the middle of the desert, and there were seashells all over the ground.
Wow. Seashells. Wow.
Seashells. Because at the prehistoric times, it was underwater. So that moment and the beauty and the amazement of what was happening really overtook me. And we ended up driving, and we drove for a while to get back to the town. And we found out that the other party had somehow made it back, and we got back, and we took our friend to the hospital. And with all of that, we got back, and I remember we had dinner. And it was probably the most amazing dinner I ever had. And I remember going back and sitting quietly and thinking, if I hadn't let go of this potential fear, of all the uncertainty, but also the anger, I would have never been able to enjoy this experience. And, all these years, 20 plus years later, I think back and I thought, I had some strength in myself and something that I hadn't realized in that moment, because it was very scary and I was out of my element. Language wise, this was Arabic, everybody spoke some English, but I was out of my element. I was, the guy from Washington who was in the middle of the desert. But I think it is this testament that if we get caught in our fear, we can miss out and I say anger too, because I was angry in that moment. But it was a lesson in when we focus on certain things. And we've talked about this. This is where our attention will go. And that's where our emotions will go. And how often, if we're in that space, we are missing out on the moment. We're missing out on the experiences, even in challenging times. These moments that really, I think back and I think, wow, this is a story that, and of course there's so many other details, but this is a story that I can reflect back on and see how strong I was during that time. How I was able to move out of these really intense emotions, and to be able to truly experience those really amazing times that I had. I mean, and if I had been in that space, I would never have been able to really see and feel and smell and hear everything that was going on around me. The fact that we survived was interesting. I mean, because again, we could have been lost. There's no doubt. I mean, when we talked to people, they said, "You're so lucky." The other thing I found out after the fact was that the area that we were in was a place where Egypt and Libya had been fighting. And every so often, because of the sand, there's still mines that are underneath the sand. There's landmines that have been planted. And every so often, someone will come across a landmine because it's been uncovered by the sand, or from the wind. And I kept thinking that was just another added piece to this of, that I was very fortunate, but I also was fortunate that I was able to direct my attention and really experience the companionship that I had with those people that I was around. The companionship and the connection that I created with the guys who were in the Jeep. I mean, they could have just simply gone back, but they decided that it was so important for us to experience this moment of being in the desert and seeing kind of this history, the shells that were all around. But also the fact that these other men had given of themselves, their food and their water to us. And I think that's what also helped me kind of be in the present moment, because I continue to talk about how important also those connections between us really make a difference in our lives. And, and so anyways, it's the long story of a fascinating journey. But I look back upon it as really a moment of incredible lessons that I hadn't really thought about for all these years. And so, so I don't know. It just, again, I wanted to offer that, but, it could have gone a different way, certainly. But it also, for our health and our wellness and our safety, but it also could have gone in a different way where I had seen it as a terrible situation, a scary situation, and one that I could have been very angry about, from the interaction that I had with this other person, So.
Awesome. Can I ask you a few questions? Because
yes,
when you were describing the whole situation, I had in my mind there are lots of questions raised. And the first of all is that when you met the American woman with that company of people, I mean, I just want to clarify in order to understand the whole set. I mean, they were spending night in that near to the waterhole, right? Or they were just stopping for a while and then moving. What happened? I just want to understand that why you were separated, why you were again alone, even though there were people around.
So they too created, that was their safari, but this was their safari was that afternoon to go to this water hole that was out in the desert. And so they had paid for and arranged to go that afternoon out to the water hole, just as we were going out into the desert. They had this whole group of people who were going to spend the afternoon and early evening at this water hole cooking out, and so they weren't going to stay overnight. They were leaving.
They left.
They left, and so that's why she said, we can't take you. We're not going to squeeze you into our cars when we go back, and no one can come back to get you because it will be dark. So you have to stay here. Yeah, you have to stay here. We can't help you. But I'm being nice about the way that she said it, because she was not interested in helping us whatsoever. And even though I thought I might have an advantage because I'm American, she was not going to have it. And it spoke to kind of affluence and power. That's a whole nother subject. But I was experiencing this kind of hierarchy, and she was not interested in our well-being. She was only interested.
Now I understood. I understood, because I thought they're spending night over there near to the whole water hole, and I was thinking, well, at least you are kind of around people, and it's not bad already. You actually, they just left. I see that.
Yes, and then somehow miraculously, as they were driving away, our truck showed up.
That's clear. That's a very very positive kind of resolution, and very fortunate. And tell me, please, if you would analyze the lessons, or at least right now when you are reflecting on that whole event, what would be the lesson, the most strong one, or kind of emotionally engaged lesson? How you would formulate it?
I think, simply put, how do we not let the fear and uncertainty rob us of and take away from the experiences that we can have, that can take away these really often precious moments or moments of learning, that if we're so consumed in this fear or anger or uncertainty, we're not able to see what's really going on around us. And I think that was my biggest lesson, because I would have robbed myself of all the wonderful things that happened, and yes, it was scary, and yes, it was uncertain, but somehow I created the mindset to kind of move away. When that young man was breaking down in the middle of the desert, I could have gone there with him in his emotion and in his fear, but somehow I was able to pull in the strength that overtook my own fear and encouraged him. And I was pulling him up the side of the dunes. We were literally just clawing our way. But if we are stuck in these places, and we're stuck in that fear, and it's overtaking us, there are things that are happening around us. And sometimes those may be special things. They may be beautiful things. They may be, things that can impact us in some way. And I think that was really the lesson for me, that if we're stuck in this place and we allow fear and uncertainty to take over, then we miss out on things in our lives. And I think that for me is the lesson.
The lesson. Well, what I also hear, and I would like to comment on it and see what you think about it. There are two aspects here which I'm curious about. First, if there would be no whining partner whining, I mean, not whining, maybe the partner who is much worse kind of condition psychologically, if, don't you think that in some ways it's a good thing? I mean, because, I mean, if you, when you start helping others, when you are trying to encourage someone, you know, who is in kind of in a trouble, could it be that actually that was an essential element of overcoming your own potentially kind of troubled condition as well? I mean, could it be?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as I hear you say that, there is no doubt, because I am a firm believer that when, and we've talked about this in other conversations, that when we give of ourselves and we're putting that energy back out, it does make a difference. You've nailed it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I remember stories when people are kind of getting in troubles or some terrible situations with, for example, with child, and taking care of someone who, well, somehow they were able to endure and overcome so much more than probably if they would be on their own, you know, in their own thoughts and some kind of, yeah. So this is the interesting aspect of maybe, I would say, not a solution, but how you potentially could use it, you know, for like a taking care of someone and stop focusing just on your own feelings, potentially could be a mean to, you know, to get better and overcome. It's just yeah, it's just what I see is potential lessons also, at least according to your description. And another interesting thing I was just also curious is that when you were describing the whole situation and you said you were able to overcome the anger and somehow find the focus on other things, what do you think was the key element? You know, how you were able to, you know, to refocus, for example, from your anger? What you started to pay attention to?
That's a wonderful question. And I've been thinking about this. I wrote this down, and it's interesting. I think it goes to that deeper part of us, whether you call it faith, whether you call it that spiritual connection to something else. I truly believe that I was being given this strength, this kind of this idea of being patient and trust, and and this faith that it's going to be okay, that we've gone through all of this, you know, because it literally was one thing after another.
Yeah.
But I think that's really where I wrote this down. I think it was faith and trust, and we hear that as a theme, you know, in some religions, and we hear it in kind of a spiritual context. And I have to say, I think that's truly what was happening for me. That there was this deep part of me just to believe that everything was going to be okay, and then I began to let go. But I can't. It's one of those things where you can't put your hand on it. You can't. You know, it wasn't even kind of a mental process. I think in some way I was just given that strength and that energy, and maybe part of that goes back to giving myself to others and trying to help. That it was kind of moving through me, I suppose. I don't know.
No, it's interesting. I really, yeah, kind of all everything what you just said very much resonating. And I also have a kind of comment which is could be or could not be the not a true, but some kind of, yeah, maybe there is some truth in it. But because before you, when you formulated it, that you were able not to give yourself to that fear, I agree. But at the same time, I'm curious, maybe partially, maybe fear itself making things clear. I mean, like why I'm saying that is that some soldiers, like I talk with some. I used to live in university with one of the guys who get back. They were in the special forces in Afghanistan, and somehow they the guys had told me that somehow those days full of fear and danger, right now in their memory, it's like a colorful, it's kind of full of strength, powerful times. And now when he get back to the normal life, it's all gray and not interesting at all. No, I mean, maybe it's extremes, but those times when the fear in the air, it also serves us to make maybe to connect with the source, maybe to clarify our values. I mean, that it's like we could choose to see fear as something pure negative which we need to overcome, but I believe it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I believe that fear has essential cleaning essence into it. I mean, partially it's making things clear, what is important, what is not. And without that, maybe people have actually real difficulties to connect with the source and really, I mean, fear make it clear. But if it's too much, if it's overcoming you, it could paralyze you. So it's like, I believe there is some kind of, not black and white entirely, but I believe that a little bit of fear actually serves us, actually could be used as a empowering and clarifying, essence. But if it's too much, yes, you could be paralyzed. You could lose, the whole kind of, the whole presence. If you allow fear to control you. Does it make sense? I mean, that at least that's comment.
Oh, yeah. No, there's no doubt. I'm so with you with that, and I think that's what came into this situation, that I actually kind of in some way was embracing that fear. It was the driver. It was actually a positive in how I was able to move through things. That it actually enabled me to manage the situations. Because in essence, I mean, as I reflect on that story, there were so many moments where I was actually kind of putting myself out there to lead. And I hadn't really thought about it, but so many times it was me kind of leading, where we were going. And I think the other thing is being in that state. I do remember that the next day, when I woke up, I just remember seeing things so much more vividly. Like like the palm trees looked different to me. The sky looked different to me. The water, the people, there was something that shifted in what I was seeing. And now as you brought that to me, it may have been because of that fear that was really in there, that I was able to it just changed me. It changed me.
Yeah.
But there was a peacefulness. It was almost maybe coming off that high part and then coming low again. But I remember being at such peace the next day and really seeing things even differently than I had seen them, and just so grateful, for kind of everything that had happened, and grateful for, that moment that I was in. But there was so much calm and peace. But yet that day before, it was, I mean, you can't make it up, it was like,
yeah,
what?
That's powerful, really powerful.
Yeah. So thank you for your observations and what you picked up, because that you're so right on, in terms of giving of ourselves, but also how fear can actually be used as a motivator, as a guide. And in some ways it can be very positive.
Yeah. It's actually kind of pushing us to some kind of extreme. In Russian kind of culture, we have a proverb that you actually don't know who is really who unless you go with them into the, we call it, there is a special term when you are like insurgency, like war, like you go through the war and then you will know who is who. I mean, that's in some ways, yeah, fear is cleaning, and the extreme situations, they make things kind of very clear. And you could learn who you are going through those things.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's powerful. Really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And you see some people are not willing to help, and you see some people who practically don't have much, but they are willing to help. It's, yeah, you cannot, unless you are in that extreme, unusual situation, you will never know who is who, and who behaves, and yeah, whose essence, and
the character.
Whoa,
right?
yeah.
It's kind of the character. It's
Yeah.
the essence of who we are, because it does.
Yeah.
It draws out the very core of who we are.
Yeah.
You know,
It actually drives our belief system.
in our
And
belief system.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Because this brings it even more deeper into that story. And it's so true. So that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there are lots of levels, and yeah, the injury and how your friends behaved and how they even took, everyone. Nevertheless, even though it was a kind of quite horrifying event, but they made it, and as a result, you remember that dinner time, and that experience is one of the best experiences. This is really awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, John.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, we will continue our talks, and I actually made some amendments, so we need to discuss it. Right now I added like a coaching life stories, because I see that we are digging and trying to come up with some kind of, reflections, conclusions, and so yeah, you could say teaching stories or coaching stories, or at least we are trying to reflect on our experiences and get something out of it. As I said in the beginning, someone famous said that we are not really learning unless we are reflecting. So we are not really learning from experience. We are learning from our reflection on experience. So I think that it makes sense to spend some time and think, okay, well, what was it all about? Why I behaved this way or that way, and what am I actually taking out of it? Because it could change over time. Maybe now we are taking out of those events so much more than we were able to take out like immediately or during event. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It has some kind of concealed potential, which is revealed over time. It's interesting.
Yeah. No, I think it's wonderful. And just as we just experienced, your questions and your observations really brought out other aspects that I hadn't really seen, but yet, I can absolutely understand them now, and I can see them. So, your questions brought out different layers of this and different learning. And so absolutely, I think it's a wonderful approach to this. So excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
All right.
So looking forward to our next conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.